Okay, so we're back in the next video, and we've got our sort of initial layout done. We fixed a few trouble areas. We're going to look at now bringing this to sort of like the final stage in ZBrush. We're going to basically double check it by rendering it and evaluating the alpha, and then we're going to move into ZBrush, or excuse me, Photoshop. So at this stage, when we first laid these stones out, we made sure everything had the matte cap white. And the reason for that is because now I can go in the modifiers tab and I can set the overwrite color to 1, and now I can just evaluate sort of the forms in the canvas. So color sort of isn't getting in my way, where I initially used sort of the color and value shapes to get these things placed in interesting ways. Now I can evaluate sort of like the scene lighting, and right away obviously we've got this sort of darker side plane here and these underplanes, so maybe I might want a little more variation throughout the canvas. So I could go and selectively add or replace some stones in order to balance out some of the shadows across the texture. But for now we're going to move forward with this. But that's a really useful thing, this overwrite color, and I think you can only do that with matte caps, so that's why I use that. Small workflow tip: I took all my final layers and I moved them all to the beginning of the layer stack here, and that's because when I opened up this document layer later, the first layer in the stack will be selected and visible, whether it's visible in my document or not. So I do that just so that only my visible layers are in the front. That way I can browse and open the document and I'm not surprised by what I see later. So I'm going to go ahead and dupe that layer, move it all the way to the end, dupe it, move it all the way to the end, dupe it, move it all the way to the end, and then with the rightmost layer selected, I'm going to hit merge. Whoops, I'm going to say no first because I have Z sub on. So I'm going to hit Z add, and I'm going to additively merge all these guys. I also want to make sure I have mRGB on, which I do. So mRGB and Z add, and I'm just going to additively merge them all together. So if I shut off my original layers and I select my new merged layer, what I should see now is, of course, all of my depth information here, but I should also have my poly painting, which I do. Now to evaluate the alpha, I'm just going to go ahead and grab dock on this new merged layer. See, if I try to grab dock on any other layer, it's only going to get that particular layer. So in order to evaluate the Z depth as a whole, I need to grab dock on a merged layer. And of course I'm going to need to reset my tiling value here too. And it looks pretty good, so I'm not seeing any large jumps across the front planes of these stones from like black to white. I'm pretty happy with where everything sort of sits in Z space. I'm going to go ahead and delete that copy because I'm going to start working on the originals again. The last thing I need to do is sort of get my height variance amongst these rows. So I could go ahead and just with tilde and alt, not that layer, oh no wait, that is the layer, with tilde and alt on, actually this, I'm going to do this layer. With tilde and alt on, I could just start sliding it out and just set it and forget it, but what I'm not able to evaluate right now is cast shadows, and those are going to be really important. They're going to not only help inform me as to where these things are in Z-space, but they're also, if I decide to bake lighting in the texture, I want to make sure that the cast shadows are pleasing. So I'm going to double check my anti-aliasing, just make sure it's low for now, just to speed things up. And I'm going to execute a best render. Alright, so the render just completed, and overall the cast shadow quality is really soft, which if we were to bake this into the texture and then put it in a variety of lighting conditions. That's probably a good thing, but for now yeah, I'd like some sharper cast shadows, plus it'll help me sort of see sort of how these shadows fall across some of these forms. So what we can do is we can go back to our light palette, and with our key light selected, we'll go ahead and check the shadow properties. And if we bring the aperture down to something low, let's try 20, it'll still be sort of soft, then we should be able to get much sharper cast shadows. And instead of re-rendering and waiting for the whole canvas, what we can do is we can pick just kind of an important area and just hit Control R with the best render already active, because I haven't touched the canvas and I haven't selected preview at all. So right away we got a little bit sharper cast shadows. Let me try another region up here. So this can be a good way as you start tuning your shadows and your lighting, and then some of your settings and everything. You can just selectively start rendering parts of the canvas, and it'll go a lot faster. See there, we're starting to get a little bit of it coming across the form. So now I'm going to go back to my layer and double check that this is the one I want to pull forward. Yes, it is. I'm going to pull it forward just a little bit, not too much at this stage. And I'm going to go ahead and hit best render again, but I'm going to hit escape to cancel it almost immediately, sort of immediately. And then I can just go ahead and hit Control R in an area where I'm expecting to see some cast shadows fall onto some of these other stones. So I can double check to see how they look. So there we go. That's pretty good, actually. I kind of like where it's sitting in space. We've got a little bit, it might be a little too far forward. So I'll actually probably push it back just slightly by going back into preview and then pushing it back just a tiny bit. And now at this stage I'll probably just go ahead and execute one more best render. But before I do that, those shadows are a bit too hard for probably texture use. So I'm going to kind of go in between, just for stylistically, I'm going to kind of go in between the sort of soft shadows and those harder shadows, just so that we do have some harder cast shadows. Alright, so the best render just finished, and overall I'm pretty happy with the height variation. I got a little more cast shadow here on some of these areas, but it's not too much. And overall I kind of like the way some of these areas kind of pop out into the light and then they recede back, and you get all that sort of, you know, shadows. In the next video we're going to look at rendering out a few different passes, few different lighting passes for some ambient occlusion and lighting and everything. But for now, if I wanted to, I could go back into the grout layer. Whoops, let me hit escape. Before you do anything else, you probably want to hit preview again, so you don't have to wait, because it's going to want to regenerate a best render. So I could go back to the grout layer and I could, use the single layer brush again and start pulling up some of these areas. But for now, I'm calling it done, and that's that.